Have you ever seen mushrooms like this before? These are wine cap mushrooms or garden giants. And I've added some of this sawdust spawn directly into this planter pot, and now we're getting some amazing mushrooms coming up just like this. You can see the size of these guys. They're called garden giants for a reason. And I'm going to show you how you can add some of this sawdust spawn directly into garden beds, or if you don't have gardens, just into planter pots just like this, and you can grow some amazing looking mushrooms straight in your garden. Okay, so the first thing to note with wine cap mushrooms is they cannot be grown like other gourmet mushrooms where we grow them in bags and in buckets and in controlled environments. Wine cap mushrooms need to have a relationship with the soil microbes. So that's why they're perfect for companion garden planting and also in planter pots like this, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. So in any setting, you need to introduce some soil. So for the planter pot, what we're going to do is put a layer of potting mix just at the bottom of the planter pot to get started. Planter pots are great to grow wine caps in because they're movable. So we're going to be putting this in a more shaded environment than traditionally for plants. So planter pots are great for that aspect. They're also great if you don't have a garden at home, so you can still grow these mushrooms. So what you want to do is have this soil layer inside this planter pot a couple of inches deep, and this is going to be the base for the growing setup. The next two items that we're going to be using along with the sawdust spawn is hardwood wood chips and also sugarcane mulch here. So earlier we pre-soaked this sugarcane mulch by just putting a bunch into a bucket, and then we just filled it up with water, and we want to let that sit for around half an hour just so that we can get the sugarcane mulch nice and moist so that the sawdust spawn has something to grow upon, because we want to keep this relatively moist throughout its growing process. The other component we're using is hardwood wood chips. You can just pick these up at any hardware store, and it's important to be using hardwood wood chips instead of softwoods. Softwoods like pine have antifungal compounds in them, so it's a lot easier to get started if you source hardwood wood chips. So really try and source those to get started with. So what we're going to do is use these components along with the sawdust spawn in a lasagna method, basically just putting layer upon layer, and that's going to allow us to build up all the way up to the top of this planter pot here. And the mycelium from the sawdust spawn, the wine cap, is going to work its way through breaking down the cellulose and lignin based in the hardwood wood chips and also the sugarcane mulch. So if you don't have access to sugarcane mulch, you can use straw. You just want to be pre-soaking that as well. And you can use one or the other, but it's ideal to use both. What we're going to get here is by using sugarcane mulch and also these hardwood wood chips, which are quite large, is a great variation of particle sizes. And this is going to allow a lot of air exchange to happen within the mix, and it's going to allow the mycelium to grow really well. You want to avoid having really compact, dense substrate with the wine caps, and so mixing these two substrates together, you're going to create a nice fluffy aerated mix. So the first thing we're going to do is we've got our layer of potting mix in the bottom of this planter pot, but we're now going to add a layer of sugarcane mulch to that. So we're just adding a layer of the sugarcane mulch first. And then we're going to add a layer of our sawdust spawn here. Now you may have one of our garden kits, or you may have one of our bulk sawdust spawn. Principle's the same. What you want to do is sprinkle a layer of mycelium across the surface. Just break it up. All of this sawdust spawn are inoculation points, and is the inoculum that's going to get started. So a layer of sawdust spawn just like that, and then what you want to do is put a layer of wood chips. And we're just going to be building up layer upon layer like this. Sugarcane mulch, spawn, and wood chips. So you want to be building up each layer, and you can make each layer an inch or so high. There's no real wrong and right way about doing this. You just want to be layering these different layers along with the sawdust spawn. So we're doing this in a planter pot at the moment, but you can also, of course, do it directly into your garden bed, where you would find a section of soil, and you would do the same principles as we're doing here. If you're going to be adding wine caps directly to a garden bed, the one thing you want to be keeping note of is the sun exposure. So typically mushrooms and wine caps, they don't want to be in direct sunlight. So if you wanted to add this to a vegetable garden, you would want to be doing it around plants that give great shade structure. The best time of year to be adding wine cap to your garden is in the cooler months of the year, because of course the hotter it gets in summer, the easier it is for the wine cap spawn to dry out and the substrate bed to dry out. So you just want to keep an eye on that. Once we get to the top of the planter pot, just a final layer of mulch. Hardwood chips are great because it's going to provide protection and keep the substrate nice and moist. It's a key part of growing mushrooms is moisture. You want to make sure that the substrate is retaining the moisture and so the mycelium can spread throughout. Once you've got your final layer of mulch on top, it's all about watering this in. So you want to give it a nice drink of water, and you want to be maintaining the moisture levels on this substrate. So it really depends on where you're situating your planter pots. If they're outside and they're getting rainfall, they're obviously not going to need to be watered as often, but if you have them under an awning, you're going to have to keep the water up to them. So I would give them a light spray every single day to allow the mycelium to work its way through. Once a couple of weeks has passed, if you start to pull back your mulch, you should start to see the white fibrous threads of the mycelium knitting together. This is a fantastic sign and is what you want to be looking for. The first 2 weeks is the most critical to allow that mycelium to work its way through the substrate. Now, these guys aren't as quick to fruit as an oyster mushroom. They're going to take around 8 to 12 weeks to be able to completely start consuming the cellulose and lignin, and you will see in the planter pot that the substrate starts to decrease, and that is it consuming that substrate. But after around 8 to 12 weeks, you'll hopefully start to see mushrooms starting to emerge, and that's the time frame that you want to be looking for. So triggers for fruiting do include the cool weather, but rainfall and high amounts of moisture really bring on the fruit body development of the wine cap mushrooms. We have successfully grown them during the summer periods where we've had really big summer storms of rain. And so while the cool weather is great to try and trigger these mushrooms to fruit, really it's all about water and rainfall. So if you don't have a high amount of rainfall after 8 to 10, 12 weeks, you can just add a lot of water. So just start hosing these planter pots and soaking them a lot, and that will initiate the fruit body development. So when these mushrooms start to emerge, keep an eye on them because they're really fast growing once they start to emerge. And there's a lot of common pests that love to go for them, like slugs. If you've got a slug problem, you want to sort of have some sort of slug mitigation going on because they'll really go for these guys. Also, your common possums and rats and things like that, everything loves to grab a wine cap mushroom. So if you've got those common pests in your garden, you'll want to cage this or provide some barriers to stop the critters getting them before you can get access to them. So you want to look after your planter pots and your garden beds for around 8 to 12 weeks, and then you'll start to see wine cap mushrooms emerging. And that's when we get to start to ID these mushrooms in your garden bed. They're a medium to large mushroom, often with caps 10 to 15 centimetres across, sometimes even bigger. When they first appear, the caps are wine red and bell-shaped when they mature. They fade to a softer, reddish brown, eventually flattening out to a straw or tan colour. The gills are a dark purpley brown, and the spore print of a wine cap is also dark purple. The stem or stipe is thick, usually around 3 to 4 centimetres wide, creamy white, and often slightly bulbous at the base. You'll also see a toothed veil that forms a ring around the stem once the cap opens up. Because you're deliberately adding spawn to a designated area in your garden, you can be quite confident that what grows there is what you planted. Even so, it's important to always positively identify any mushrooms before eating them. And so that's how to grow wine cap mushrooms, a perfect way to incorporate fungi into your gardening hobby and getting your hands dirty. These are mushrooms you won't be able to find at the supermarkets. For more information, be sure to check out the description below, which has links to our website and our seasonal planting guides. Like and subscribe, and happy growing.